Think about tomorrow. Not in the abstract, something specific. A meeting, a meal, an errand, a message you need to send. Something you are planning to do that does not yet exist in the world. It exists only as a representation inside your brain. A form in time, a sequence of steps, an outcome you intend to produce. It is not real yet. Nothing about it has happened. And yet your brain is holding it right now. Stably, continuously, accessible on demand, while the present moment continues to arrive and require your attention. The part of your brain doing this is the most recently evolved structure in the human nervous system. It sits just behind your forehead. Structurally, it is the last region of the cerebral cortex to fully mature. Development continues well into your mid-20s. It is also the first region to deteriorate with age, and the most transformed by injuries that alter personality, judgment, and the capacity to plan. Every other part of your brain is older. This part evolved last. And it is running right now. The question the mammoth bone houses of Mizurek opened was not architectural. It was cognitive. Someone, 25,000 years ago, held a complex structure in their imagination before any of it existed in the physical world. For circular buildings, 149 mammoth skulls arranged in a precise pattern. Mandibles stacked in a herringbone configuration that distributes load efficiently. Tusks positioned to arch inward and support a roof frame. All of it coordinated across multiple individuals, over days or weeks, in relation to an endpoint that existed only as a mental representation. The fossil record of the human brain cannot tell us directly what made this possible. Brain tissue does not survive. What survives is the shape of the skull, the endocast, which gives us approximate volume and gross surface features, but not the fine-grained organization of the tissue inside, or the density of connections between regions. We know that the brain of a person at Mizurek 25,000 years ago was anatomically identical to yours. Whatever changed to make that planning possible had already happened by then. It happened earlier, in tissue that left no direct record. What we have is the living evidence. The same structure, still intact, still operating in every human brain alive today, including yours, right now, holding whatever you are planning to do when this ends. For most of the 20th century, the assumption was straightforward. Human intelligence was proportional to brain size. And within the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the tissue just behind the forehead, the most recently evolved region of the cerebral cortex, was assumed to be disproportionately large in humans. The argument was intuitive. A region so central to planning, judgment, and cognitive control must be the thing that grew. The bigger the prefrontal cortex relative to the rest of the brain, the more capable the animal. In 2002, Katherine Semendeferi at UC San Diego tested this assumption directly. She and her colleagues used magnetic resonance imaging to measure and compare the frontal cortex in living specimens across all hominoids: humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and gibbons. The study was published in Nature Neuroscience. The result was counterintuitive. The human frontal cortex was not proportionally larger than that of the other great apes. At 28.8% to 33% of total brain volume, it was larger than in gibbons, but not significantly larger than in chimpanzees or gorillas. The size of the structure had not dramatically expanded during human evolution. What had changed was the organization inside. Specific subregions, particularly those responsible for integrating cognitive and emotional information, and the areas connecting the prefrontal cortex to the rest of the brain, were reorganized. The white matter tracks, the axonal connections that carry signals from the prefrontal cortex outward to other structures, were denser and more extensively branched in humans than in any other primate studied. The difference was not in the volume. It was in the wiring. Evolution had not built a larger structure. It had built a more connected one. In 2001, Earl Miller at MIT and Jonathan Cohen at Princeton published a paper in Annual Review of Neuroscience that would become one of the most cited in the field, An Integrative Theory of Prefrontal Cortex Function. Their argument reframed the question of what the prefrontal cortex actually does. It is not, they proposed, primarily a processor of information in the way other brain regions are. It does not receive sensory input and transform it into output. This function is different. The prefrontal cortex maintains active patterns of neural activity that represent goals, the things you are trying to achieve, the forms you are working toward, the outcomes that do not yet exist, and then sends bias signals outward to every other region of the brain, bending their processing toward those goals. This is not metaphor. The prefrontal cortex sends real signals that alter the activity of the motor systems that generate movement, the emotional systems that assign value and urgency, and the memory systems that retrieve relevant experience. When you suppress an impulse, the prefrontal cortex is sending a signal. When you stay on task while distracted, it is sending a signal. When you hold a plan stable while the world changes, while people interrupt, while unexpected things happen, while the immediate moment offers alternatives, it is sending signals continuously, keeping every other system oriented toward an endpoint that exists only in representation. But here's where it gets stranger. The prefrontal cortex does not produce behavior directly. It shapes it. It is the part of the brain that makes other parts of your brain serve a purpose. Every downstream system, motor, emotional, mnemonic, continues to operate by its own logic, responding to its own inputs. The prefrontal cortex does not override that logic. It biases it. It adjusts the weights. You are not responding to the world directly. You are responding to the world as filtered through a structure that already knows where you are trying to go. Every act of deferral is this structure at work. The grocery list written for a meal that will exist tomorrow. The alarm set for a time that has not arrived. The pause before responding to a message you disagree with. The project held in mind across weeks of interruption, returning each time to the same endpoint, the same form that does not yet exist. None of these feel like feats of cognition. They feel like nothing. They are so automatic, so constant, so woven into the texture of ordinary life, that you do not notice them happening. That invisibility is the measure of how central the structure is. The prefrontal cortex is not engaged for exceptional tasks. It is the background architecture of ordinary human life, the part that holds the endpoint while the present moment offers alternatives. It is running now, in this moment, holding whatever comes after this. The person placing the first mammoth skull in the base ring at Mazurek was doing something structurally identical. Holding a form in the future. Working backward from that form to the step that had to come first. Biasing every physical action, every choice of which bone to carry, where to set it, how to orient it, in relation to an endpoint that existed only as representation. The form they were holding was different. The structure doing the holding was not. The 25,000 years between Mazurek and this moment have not changed the architecture. They have changed only what the architecture is asked to hold. In 2007, Thomas Suddendorf at the University of Queensland and Michael Corballis at the University of Auckland published a comprehensive review in Behavioral and Brain Sciences. The Evolution of Foresight. What is mental time travel, and is it unique to humans? Mental time travel is the capacity to project oneself into a specific moment in time, past or future, and to experience it as real. It is not memory as retrieval. It is not conditioned behavior triggered by a cue. It is the construction of a specific novel episode, something that has not happened yet or happened long ago in full detail. The capacity to inhabit that episode imaginatively, to reason from within it, to plan from an imagined future backward to the steps required to reach it. Suddendorf and Corballis reviewed the entire comparative literature. They found genuine evidence for complex temporal behavior in non-human animals. Food caching in corvids and primates, seasonal preparation, some forms of anticipatory behavior. None of that evidence should be minimized. Animals are not simple. Their temporal capacities are real. But the specific capacity they were examining, constructing a novel, specific future episode and using it as a planning reference, found no convincing support outside the human lineage. Animals respond to what the environment signals. They respond to what their learning history has encoded. Humans respond to what they have imagined the future will require. That asymmetry, they argued, is the central feature of human cognition. It explains language because language is about things not currently present. It explains culture because culture is the transmission of information about futures the transmitter will not live to see. And it explains the mammoth bone houses, a structure built in service of a future that existed, at first, only inside the mind of whoever conceived it. The cortex is not larger. The connections are different. The capacity is unlike anything else in the animal kingdom. The prefrontal cortex did not appear suddenly. It expanded in increments across millions of years of hominid evolution, each increment providing some marginal advantage in a world where anticipating the future was the difference between surviving it and not. What crossed a threshold, what changed the capacity from limited to recursive, from reactive to genuinely prospective, is not visible in the fossil record. We can only infer it from what remains. What remains is the capacity itself. A structure that holds goals, sends bias signals across the entire brain, and constructs futures that do not yet exist. A structure that has been running continuously in every human who has ever lived. The mammoth builders held a form and moved toward it. So do you. Every plan, every deferral, every act that requires knowing where you are going before you arrive, all of it runs on the same architecture. There is one system the structure works in constant tension with, one that operates on a different timescale, responding to what is present rather than what is planned, and that can override the prefrontal cortex's bias signals in ways that leave a trace in the body long after the moment has passed. What that tension produces and what it costs is where this channel is going next. The cortex is still running.